Long before humans built cities, before religion, before money, before written history itself, our ancestors were already drinking alcohol. And according to some scientists, that wasn't an accident. The human relationship with alcohol may actually be older than humanity, which means the feeling people chase when they drink, the warmth, the confidence, the strange sense that the world suddenly becomes softer around the edges, may not be cultural at all. It may be evolutionary. Buried somewhere deep inside your DNA is a craving that began millions of years ago on the floor of an African jungle. And if that's true, it changes the story completely. Because alcohol wasn't invented in a brewery. It wasn't discovered by farmers. In a way, humanity had already been preparing for it long before civilization even existed. Here's the strange part. Nobody really talks about, why does alcohol feel good in the first place? Out of all the substances humans could have encountered in nature, why does fermented sugar specifically create feelings that resemble relief, comfort, trust, connection? Why does a drink make strangers feel familiar? The answer goes back so far that even the word ancient starts to lose meaning. Because humans didn't really discover alcohol. We evolved alongside it. Go back around 65 million years, long before humans, before apes, really. The first primates were small creatures living in dense tropical forests, nervous little animals surrounded by predators, spending most of their lives searching for food and trying not to become food themselves. Fruit was survival. And fruit, left long enough in heat and humidity, inevitably ferments. Sugars break down, ethanol forms, the smell changes. Sharper, sweeter, strange in a way that's difficult to describe unless you've smelled overripe fruit yourself. Those early primates weren't repelled by that smell. They were drawn toward it because fermented fruit usually meant one thing: calories, more sugar, more energy, more survival. And evolution pays attention to survival advantages with ruthless efficiency. Animals that were attracted to fermented fruit ate more calories. Animals that ate more calories survived longer. Animals that survived longer reproduced more often. So, over millions of years, the primate brain slowly developed a reward response to ethanol. Not because alcohol was healthy, not because evolution had some grand plan, but because survival often favors whatever works in the moment. Evolution doesn't care what destroys you slowly. It cares what keeps you alive long enough to pass on your genes. So by the time early human ancestors began walking upright across Africa, the machinery was already there. The attraction to alcohol wasn't new. It was inherited. And in 2004, scientists discovered evidence that made this story even stranger. A researcher named Matthew Kerrigan began studying a digestive enzyme called ADH4, one of the proteins responsible for breaking down alcohol inside the body. And buried in the genetic record, scientists found something strange. Around 10 million years ago, a mutation dramatically increased humanity's ability to process alcohol. Not by a little. By almost 40 times. 10 million years ago. Long before civilization. Long before language. Long before humans even looked fully human. At that point, our ancestors were still living partly in trees, but their bodies were already adapting to ethanol. Why? Because some of them had started eating fallen fruit fermenting on the jungle floor under tropical heat. And over time, the body adapted. Which means humanity's relationship with alcohol may have started millions of years before the first brewery ever existed. But eventually something changed. Humans stopped simply finding alcohol in nature and started making it on purpose. The oldest confirmed evidence comes from China around 9,000 years ago. At a site called Jiahu, archaeologists discovered traces of fermented rice, fruit, and honey inside ancient pottery. And the recipe was already sophisticated, which means humans had likely been experimenting with fermentation long before that. Because you don't perfect brewing overnight. You discover it accidentally. You repeat it. You refine it. And slowly, what began as an accident becomes culture. Then civilization. Then something much bigger. Now the story moves to southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, a massive stone site over 11,000 years old, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, and it completely disrupted the traditional story of civilization. Because according to the old timeline, humans at that point were still supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. Yet somehow they organized massive construction projects and may have been brewing alcohol. Researchers found enormous stone vessels containing residue linked to fermented grain. Primitive beer, essentially. And suddenly, archaeologists were forced to consider a strange possibility. What if humans didn't create agriculture first and alcohol second? What if alcohol helped drive the entire process? Because brewing requires grain. Grain requires farming. Farming requires settlement. In other words, one of the forces pushing humans toward civilization itself may have been the desire to create fermented drinks reliably, which sounds absurd, until you realize how powerful alcohol actually is socially. Alcohol lowers fear, reduces stress, makes strangers feel more trustworthy. And for ancient humans surviving through cooperation and alliances, that mattered enormously. Shared drinking became a shortcut for connection, a signal of trust. Anthropologists have found communal drinking rituals almost everywhere early civilization appeared. Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, the Andes. Again and again, humans kept arriving at the same idea independently. Alcohol brought people together, at least temporarily. Then alcohol became sacred. Ancient Indian texts describe soma, a mysterious ritual drink linked to divine experiences. In Greece, followers of Dionysus used wine in ceremonies meant to dissolve ordinary identity itself. And in ancient Sumer, one of humanity's earliest civilizations, there was even a goddess of beer. Her name was Ninkasi. One of the oldest recipes ever discovered is actually written as a hymn to her, because to ancient people, intoxication didn't feel chemical. It felt spiritual, like contact with something beyond ordinary human experience. For most of history, alcohol and religion existed side by side. Sometimes they were almost impossible to separate. But this story always had a darker side, because the same biology that made alcohol socially powerful also made it dangerous. Humans have known that for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian texts warned about excessive drinking. Roman physicians documented dependency. Addiction isn't modern. Modern access is. Today, alcohol exists everywhere. Celebrations, funerals, business meetings, holidays. It's marketed as confidence, connection, freedom. And at the same time, science understands its damage more clearly than ever before. And still, humanity keeps returning to it, which may be the strangest part of this entire story. After millions of years, alcohol never disappeared. Maybe because it was never just a drink. Maybe it became part of human evolution itself. The question was never really when humans started drinking alcohol. The real question is why something that can destroy us can also make us feel so deeply human.